welcome to the third episode of Azure Fest. Today we will be focusing on SecOps. People know about DevOps, more recently DevSecOps, but what about plain security operation? How do you detect an equally important respond and remediate to a security incident? This session will help you to understand the best practice recommended by Microsoft and based on actual scenarios and the latest state of regulation. Your detection and response should be cognizant of the regulation in each geography and the criticality of the data you are handling. But before we proceed, let me remind you a few housekeeping rules. This session is recorded and will be available on demand after the session. You can submit questions. Please submit anytime your questions. It will be responded in the Q&A panel. Also at the end, we have 10 minutes to focus on those questions. So don't hesitate to raise any topics you might have about your security operation. Finally, today it's my pleasure to introduce Daniel and Dr. Khan, two of our best cloud solution architects, focusing on security, from defining governance to optimizing your security in operation so that you can detect, respond, and remediate swiftly. Without further ado, Daniel.
All right, thanks, Francois. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session on unleashing the power of modern SecOps, where we talk about detections and response. My name is Daniel. I'm a cloud solutions architect, and I specialize in security. So in my session itself, I will talk about how traditional security operations has been, in fact, changed and fine-tuned along the way to modern SecOps. And we look at the environment around us, it's like we have a hybrid environment. We have a lot of connection to SaaS environment. So all this in itself, also with the increase of the threat landscape attacks, right, we have to move on to the modern SecOps. So in view of the content itself, I will have just a quick start to start things up in the introductions. After which I will talk about a recent use case study just recently from Microsoft, and then I will deep dive into the SecOps where we talk about the day 2 before I will do a wrap-up session. All right. So without further ado, let's get things started. So just a quick update from the cybersecurity agencies from Singapore. As of 4th of July 2022, they recently released the second version for CCOP updates, which is mandate requirements for all the CRI sectors in Singapore. Okay, so the last version was released back in September 2018, and then now it's like 4 years later we have this second revision. I think from a evolving threat landscape perspective, right, the revised version is timely. I would say it's to level up in terms of the capabilities and requirements for the CI sector. All right. Without further ado, also to talk about CCOP, the primary focus that I will want to touch on is about chapter 6 and 7. And largely, it will cover areas with respects to detection requirements and response and recovery requirements. So if you look from a security operations angle, these are the areas that typically, even from a traditional security operations, that is a part and parcel of things that you would want to cover in view of incident response, crisis management, logging, monitoring, detections, and response. And there are 2 key things that I want to touch on when in respect to chapter 6 and 7. Firstly is the people on the ground. I have been in the security operations before in the past, and I understand a lot of challenges that these folks on the ground face. Sometimes you need to manage projects that comes along the way, and sometimes you need to even manage a lot of auditors that you need to face, even when we expect to a lot of integrations with a SaaS application as such. Also, lastly, it's about managing all the stakeholders on the ground. So the long story short is Microsoft angle itself, we understand the pain and the issues that they face on the ground, and we actually understand from the team perspective. And we talk about the key technologies and how these people process technologies comes into place when we talk about managing from security operations. So in the list itself, I have highlighted some of the key technologies, which includes our threat protection, security posture management, and identity access management. All right. So from a threat protection, those that is familiar with this on the call, just bear with me for a few minutes as I go through this, just to in the interest of some of the folks on the call that they might not be familiar with this technology. So Sentinel is our native service. It's a SaaS service that is actually primarily provided as a SaaS. And then Defender for Endpoint primarily protects your endpoint devices, which can be your Android device, can be your iOS, as such as your servers or your laptop itself. Okay, that's the objective of Defender for Endpoint. And lastly, is about M365 Defender. It's all more about external threats that you're facing, such that whether you have any SaaS application connected to your on-premise, or even from the identity perspective, from your Active Directory. I have a slide to illustrate further on the capabilities within M365 Defender. And last two but not least is Defender for Cloud, which is about posture management. So Defender for Cloud is more from the Azure cloud perspective when you actually put on your workload and stuff from it and run it from production environment. And lastly is for the Azure Active Directory, which connects to your on-prem directories. So let's talk about a recent case study to get things started. Okay. So back in July 27, 2022, Microsoft, the Threat Intelligence Center, as well as the Security Response Center, has been observing and analyzing this group known as a Notweak. And they actually have developed this malware called the Sub-Zero. Okay, so it has been seen mostly in the European sector, as well as the Central American customers. And what is interesting about this exploit is it actually does in the exploit chain method, where it does a remote code execution to get a foothold, and subsequently does a Windows privilege escalation. So what does this malware actually does, and how does Microsoft respond to it? So to understand a bit more about how malware behavior does, right? The first stage is, in fact, when the victim access this PDF document or Excel file from email, right? It has this malicious code inside. So this is also a reminder to each and every one of us on the ground that everyone can be a victim from a phishing attack itself. And this is, in fact, one of the attack parameters that the attacker can use to attack people on the ground. So I myself can be a target as well. Everyone on the call can be a target as well. This is just a gentle reminder that phishing emails are real. Okay, and then we move on to the second stage, which is about downloading a JPEG image. So if you look at the behavior itself, this PDF document that is highly obfuscated, right, with the malware, what it does, it doesn't just plant the malware inside the laptop. What it does is it downloads another second file into your laptop, which is a JPEG image. So when you go to the third stage itself, the third stage, in fact, talks about the JPEG image. What it does, it decrypts the malware that is during the first stage when the file was downloaded and looked into the memory. Okay, so there's a few stages when it comes to the attack vector itself from the bad actor. And when we reach the fourth stage itself, apparently when the hackers has done that third stage and fourth stage, right, it can do whatever they want on the ground, like key logging, they can capture screenshots, they can apparently do a remote callback to their servers itself. So take away from this use case is like bad actors has very sophisticated attack approach where we want to detect. Okay, that's the first thing. And then second thing is, right, if you notice, right, the attack kill chain itself, that in fact it is executed in a very short time span. So from the bad actor itself, right, they want to get to the root environment from the environment at the quickest time. So it's like they don't just take their time to get and exploit the environment, but at the shortest time they want to compromise the environment. So what are the observations from Microsoft on some of the post-compromise actions with victims that has been compromised? And when we look at some of the findings from Microsoft Threat Intelligence File, you'll notice that they actually hide within a lot of common locations like the Windows registries, the Windows libraries. So this make it as per normal, is like hard for analysts or even the threat hunter to even find them, because they might just convert their malware into something that is very deeply hidden inside the registry. And also, if you look at the fourth and the fifth post-compromise actions, right, the observation is also that we tend to use commonly used cloud services like GitHub or even public file shares, right, that from an analyst perspective, right, you will not see any threats from that aspect. Yeah. So what is our recommendation to customers when they are aware of such threats in their environment? So Microsoft can come up with a list of summaries that, in fact, we don't just talk about protecting the endpoint itself. That is the fundamentals and the parameters defense. But we look at how can we have indications of compromise to investigate your environment. Point 3, if you're talking about a rich item. So from a security analyst perspective, right, they need to understand how they can even investigate and look into the current environment to see if any of the endpoint devices is being compromised. On top of that, we talk about best practice and recommendations that you can provide on the ground to, in a way, harden the environment when it comes to the Excel macro security settings. So these are areas that, from a team perspective, right, you will notice, right, I have highlighted the 2 key titles, which is a CISO and SOC managers. From their perspective, right, they need to be answerable to stakeholders. They need to know how to manage the situations. And a lot of times they need to know what they can advise to their teams. So all in all, from Microsoft perspective, right, we look at any malware that comes along, that we look at from the end-to-end security, from the endpoint device, as well as from the SOC perspective. So we move on to security analysis, which we talk about the recommendation that is given. So firstly, it's about the defense detection for antivirus, which is a signature base for the not weak virus. And then it's about detection for endpoint, which about indication of threats that can be residing inside the endpoint. Subsequently, we talk about threat hunters, which a lot of times threat hunters are there to hunt for threats. I have a lot of queries, also customer asking, actually, what is the key difference between a security analyst as well as a threat hunter? Well, in my opinion, I would say security analyst itself, they will handle incidents that has been surfaced from the scene itself, or even investigate incidents, whether it's a false positive, whether it's a true positive, or even come down into details to understand the impact and eventually have that reports to the CISO. Then, while threat hunters' perspective, right, they are looking for unknown threats, meaning to say it's not about threats that has been surfaced. Their main objective is to hunt for threats. So if we go by the zero trust approach, right, it's always about the assumed breach itself. So the threat hunters' mindset is about thinking that the environment is already breached, and they are there to hunt for unsurfaced threats that can be residing in the environment. That is the key difference between the analyst and the hunter. There are some organizations where they have overlapping the roles itself. So it depends on the organization that where these two roles can be one person that is doing these two roles, or it can be split into different roles itself. So let's take a look at the analyst itself when we talk about the dashboard. So from the dashboard, this is the Sentinel dashboard where you can see. And from the analyst itself, most of the time they will be looking at the analytics tools on the left of the dashboard, you see. And when I mentioned about having things that is off the shelf, that is easy for them, right? They just need to do a search at the rule template portion to have that not weak group attacks that is there. So with that information there, from Microsoft perspective, our threat intelligence, right, we also highlight where are the possible data sources that you can actually fish out all these possible threats that has been there, as well as the monitor attack framework where we talk about the tactics and techniques that is used in view of the attacks that's coming in. Of course, if you require more information, there is this panel on the right side that the analyst can actually zoom in and in fact have more details about it, about the history of it, about the data itself. Yeah, those can be more details itself. And when we look at the threat hunters itself, right, I talk about the out of the box KQL queries that's been used. And then if you refer to our Microsoft Azure Sentinel GitHub repository, right, this is a community shared repository that is a continuous update, not just from our Microsoft Threat Intelligence folks, but also from the public. You notice that Notweek is there in the folder, and some of the more famous ones, Log4j, Lemon Duck, those are there as well. And let's go into the folder itself to find out more. And from the folder itself, you can see the list of the YAML script itself. And from the YAML script itself, you can identify what is the query that the threat hunters is looking for as per what they when they understand the threat that's coming from. So let's look at one of the file itself, which is about file hash indication of threats that's related to Notweek. So let's dive deeper into one of the YAML script, and you can look at the information that provides the overall description of the hunting details, as well as the KQL queries that highlighted all the file hashes where it talks about the indication of threats. Because if you recall, in my first slide, I talk about the files that has been sent, right, is encrypted, right? So these are indications of whether the hashes is the indication of threats coming from Notweek, right? So this is my last slide for the research case study, and I'll move on to the daily SecOps 2, day 2 portion. So let's go back to the fundamentals where we talk about chapter 6 and 7. The first part of the detection requirement is always about logging. And logging being the single source of truth, especially for the security team, apparently it's for everyone. The CISOs, the sub-managers, the security analysts, as well as the threat hunters. Because having that source of truth is important to collect and store, so that whenever we have a certain case of a suspected anonymous attack. These are the data that we can actually look into to analyze and search for the harm and threats. So from Azure perspective, Azure cloud perspective, right, we have this storage repository which is used for storing all the logs itself. So a lot of misconception, what kind of storage this log analytics workspace is. It's neither a file storage nor a log storage. It's actually a table storage. Meaning to say, when data comes in, right, it's actually organized into separate corners with multiple rows of data. Because we understand the big data that is coming in, there can be a lot of logs that is coming, especially from the endpoint itself, or even from the firewalls itself, from the Active Directory itself. So this table storage, in fact, helps to minimize the search and queries, especially which is important to the threat hunters, as well as the threat analysts. And when it comes to the compliance for the logging itself, I think those are part and parcel of log storage. You can do site retentions period, you can archive the policy, you can even prevent unauthorized access and modification and deletions. This is part of also the forensic requirements when it comes to auditing stuff like that. So we move on to the monitoring and detection portion, which talks about how we can actually have out-of-the-box rule templates to use. So I touched base on the log itself, right? Okay, let's go back to that case study again. Okay, so from an analyst perspective, right, when we look at the analytics rules, well, we are able to very shortly define that what is the severity level that Microsoft want to highlight from this attack. What is the data source? What kind of tactics and techniques from the multi-attack framework that we are always mapped to in view of the attack framework, the Q-chain attack framework. And let's take a look at another case study where I'll do a search template for Azure. So let's say we search for Azure. We talks about or contains all the detections, all the threats that is relevant to Azure cloud itself. So one example that I want to highlight, the three examples I want to highlight in this slide here. Let's say the first one is about the Azure Active Directory identity protections alerts. So this talks about issues like risky sign-ins. You might have a user that suddenly have this login credentials that is maybe from overseas, that is not in Singapore. So this is a risky sign because the SIEM itself, it detects that, the Azure Active Directory detects that this user, based on his historical profile, doesn't warrant that person to log in from an overseas account. Okay, so this actually alerts that can be flagged out. So second example is about the Log4j, which is one of the famous attacks last year itself, that talks about the WAF attack. This is also about attackers trying to leverage on the Log4j vulnerability to attack the web application. Lastly is about the Azure VM, which is about the run command operator execution. So when it comes to running virtual machines on Azure, we also have threat alerts to detect suspicious login windows that is not by a bastion host or it's not by an authorized path. Okay, all this can be suspicious activities that is actually executed from the bad actors. So let's move on to a bit about threat hunting. Okay, we talk about built-in queries, and when you look at the dashboard itself, on the left side you can see there's a threat hunting dashboard, and you can do queries based on not just the last 24 hours. You can do it for 1 week. You can do it for 30 days. Okay, so Microsoft stand is, we understand from analysts and threat hunters that they are on the ground, they are very busy. It's very challenging for them to handle all the queries that comes in. We always understand from a dashboard that we want to make it as user-friendly as well as information that is there for them to actually query. So not just for built-in queries, for more advanced, right, threat hunters can actually build their own custom KQL queries. Okay, I did mine for not with the file hash IOC because I noticed that it is not yet inside the built-in, but eventually it will be there. So you can actually also customize and create your own KQL queries to search for the threats that is relevant that you want to find. So one of the things that I want to highlight is about the bookmarks to keep track of hunting results. So for example, when an incident happens and a threat analyst has been allocated that role, so sometimes when you, based on the incident itself, you want to find the impact that it has on the environment. This threat hunter might search for more impact itself, and when you search for more impact, let's say for example there is more devices on the ground that was infected, right? You can do this bookmark feature that can tag these details, the results, picture results to the incident itself. So it's a very powerful feature to help to understand the full impact from analyst perspective. So one of the case studies I will talk about, let's say we talk about suspicious SOC analyst activities. Let's say this threat hunter, in this case, is there's this case about suspicious SOC analyst activities. So it's about the actions that this SOC analyst perform. So for example, right, a normal SOC analyst will not be viewing a storage account private keys, or be even deleting a VM itself, and of course creating a new administrator user. And these are the things that is beyond the norm of a SOC analyst role itself. So there's a suspicious that this SOC analyst is doing something that's beyond his scope. So the preliminary check from a threat hunter, of course, we will want to dive into some of the activities that this SOC analyst has done. So based on this use case itself, right, if you look at the screenshot, if you observe that there is actually virtual machines that has run commands and actions that's executed, while the rest is similar about security insights, which is doing the automation rules, the incidents, the commands, which is part and parcel of a SOC analyst duties of whatever he's doing on the platform itself. But it doesn't warrant the SOC analyst to run certain commands on virtual machines. With that, right, from a threat hunter views, right, it actually warrants a further investigation to find out whether this guy is actually doing things that he's supposed to do, or doing things that beyond his core duty, or it could be even a compromised credentials that is holding this analyst profile. So we can dive into the Azure activities that they run. We can find out about anomalous run commands, about infrequent run command interactions, and also we can check on the Microsoft Defender for endpoints to find out about details that has surfaced from there. So this is how I correlate some of the technologies, key technology I mentioned. So let's conclude the result is right. From the Defender for endpoint, we are able to call out the PowerShell scripts that was run. And in fact, this analyst was trying to import certain modules to run certain outputs. So it was legitimate because based on the commands that was executed, right, ipconfig, PowerShell execution, it wasn't a malicious attempt to actually do a connection back or even try to sniff further information. Okay, so this is a case study of how a threat hunter, in fact, they are on the ground to even be cautious about suspicious SOC activities that requires further investigation. So let's move on to the repository, which I talked about. Let's say if you want to hunt for further Azure activities, we have also within our GitHub repo, we talks about lots of Azure activities that you can hunt for. So some examples is like if you want to hunt for anonymous listing of storage keys, which is not intended by the internet user. Or even you can find about who actually run these commands from the Azure IP itself. And lastly, also last two is about granting permissions to account, perhaps as escalated profile, and also about opening ports on Azure's resources, which normally you don't do that on a regular basis, or when it goes to security operations, unless that ports warrants requirements, a permit to open it. Else, typically you'll be based on port 3 or port 80. Yeah, so these are some of the activities within the Azure cloud itself that helps the threat hunters to hunt for threats, things that actually has been done that is beyond the normal activities. So let's move on to the item 4, which is about threat intelligence. Okay, this from Sentinel perspective, right? We have this threat intelligence platform data connector, which in fact is the analyst when it comes to integrations with all the threat intels from outside. So let's say, for example, we want to feed intelligence like from a risk IQ, which we recently acquired. Those can be actually done with ease from the portal itself. And of course, we talk about importing open source threat intelligence that you might have, or maybe from certain industry best practices. So from Sentinel itself, right, we understand that the threat intel integration is very important. But what's important is even about importing them and enriching them with the indicators, with the geolocations and the data itself. So from Microsoft angle itself, we want that threat intelligence feed when it's fed into our environment to display together all the indicators. So it's like a lot of times is to ease the threat analysts as well as the threat hunters workload itself when they're on the ground. So let's move on to a case of incident management when things happens on the ground. Let's say you are a threat analyst. Okay, so on the left portion of the dashboard, you can clearly see that the activities. You can actually see that whether is it a new incident, is it active or is it closed. And then from there, you can even see the severity as well as the incident's ID. Okay, and then what do you do once you see the incident? You can actually view the full details, or you can have a lot of actions. This talks about investigation. You can run a playbook or even create automation rule. I'll talk about that shortly. And let's talk about looking it in to have the full details of the incidents. The first thing about having understanding the incidents flow is having to assign to a security analyst. Okay, so also to set the status to active. So these two actions, in fact, you can actually innovate in a playbook environment so that a lot of times we are trying to automate these actions. And then you have to see the overall timeline in terms of when the incident was triggered. And of course, from the Sentinel dashboard, you can have a view of the similar incidents, because from an incident perspective, right, analysts will want to know how does this incident correlates with other incidents. Was it a chain attack? Was it a similar bad actor? Was it a similar malware that is revolving inside the environment? It's actually a powerful features where if you click on the similar incidents, you actually map areas of entity that's relevant to the threat. And lastly, it's about the commands that you can actually add text and images. Of course, this is to have the accurate reporting to management. So let's say we want to go deeper into investigating the incident itself. We have that illustration map. This is a simple example of how the malware got into one of the endpoints. We can have the entity directly connected to the other and each resources. And when you investigate further itself, we actually have a deeper details on when it actually happened and when it actually triggered that kind of incident. From a threat analyst perspective, right, when we saw this incident, a lot of times from a CISO, even from the sub manager, even a stakeholder perspective, they want to know what is the impact. They want to know how long this malware has been around. They want to know all the information they can get from this attack itself. So threat analysts are always being pressured to have that kind of details, the soonest itself. Yeah, but from the Sentinel perspective, we always understand that these informations are readily available for them. So I will talk about closing the incident. Let's say if this suspicious activities, right, is classified as a false positive, or it can be even undetermined, right? Those can in fact be done from the screen itself, on browser itself. So let's go through some other use cases. Okay. So for example, I talk about Playbook itself. When an incident is created, you can actually use it to create a ticket from a ticketing system such as ServiceNow. So these are playbooks that is actually out of the box from the GitHub portal itself, which I will share in my subsequent slides. So these case studies talk about suspected compromised users moving around the network and stealing information. Okay, so this incident was created based on a compromised user that is detected, and the playbook does a creation of a ticket at the ticket system. That is by the REST API. Doing the application insight that integrates with the ITSM solutions. Then from the playbook, you will send a message to the SecOps. It can be by email itself, it can be by a voice, but typically it's by email, to ask the admin team whether to block or ignore this user profile. So at the fourth stage itself, the playbook in fact waits for a response from the security operations, whether to block or ignore the request. So when it comes to this stage, right, let's say if you block the request, we can configure that playbook that will send a command to AAD to disable the user, and even to also to one of the firewalls to block the IP address. So at the fifth stage itself is more of the execution. And if you choose to ignore, the playbook will close the incidents, and then the ticket will also be closed at the ITSM service now. So this is also to illustrate that sometimes we always try to automate things, right? But at certain stage of the incident, we also need the response from the security team itself, because this is not a decision that we will immediately block. At times, it can be a false positive, which might disrupt the user's working environment. So this is just a simple case study of a playbook that is readily available for our users. And on top of really available playbooks, right? Similarly, in our GitHub repo, you can have this out of the box. Let's say if you want to block AAD user, or even if you want to block a bad IP address on the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. This can in fact be incorporated in the playbook, or even if you want to block an on-prem AD user. These are some of the examples that I want to call out. All right. So let's move on to incident response resources for the more experienced security analysts and SecOps teams. So within Microsoft, in the interest of time, because my session is short, there's actually a lot of details of how best to investigate incidents, how best to investigate alerts, and of course, how best to use your SecOps center, revolving around Microsoft Sentinel, Defender for Cloud, and also Azure AD. So we have this framework and usage of, because we have gathered a lot of information from our threat intelligence, right? And a lot of times it's about a tool that helps the SecOps teams move very effectively and efficiently. Yeah. So I just want to call out that we have a lot of resources from Microsoft angle to help the team. So lastly, I'll talk about crisis management and cybersecurity exercise, which is also part of the CCOP requirements. So Microsoft, within out of the box on our public website, we have this checklist, in fact, to prepare a lot of these SOC operations when they respond to security incidents. We have, in fact, some of the guidelines on how you can do periodic tabletop exercise, even conduct point-in-time simulation attacks against critical systems. Okay, so point-in-time meaning to say it can be a known simulated exercise, it can be unknown. So these are activities that we have within our checklist to, in fact, help the SecOps teams on the ground. If they currently don't have anything that we can reference to, do make use of these resources from Microsoft. And it's very informative, it's very useful, and then try to fine-tune it and fit into the environment. Yep. So let's do a wrap-up in view of the things that I shared. So one of the asks I have a lot of times from the CISOs and SOC managers, Daniel, do you have like some of the key dashboards that I can view when it comes to knowing what's on the ground? So my recommendation is always about, there's 3 dashboards that you can talk about. First is Sentinel. Sentinel, which is our SIEM. So from CISOs and SOC manager perspective, right, they are very busy on the ground. And a lot of times they leave the groundwork to the analysts, they leave it to the threat analysts, they leave it to some of the engineers to run the day-to-day operations. Certain point of time, sometimes they need to have like oversight of what's going on in the environment. They can refer to Sentinel to understand the incidents by status, like whether how many new incidents are there, how many are closed for the FY, and also about all the data sources that's collected. Yeah. So Sentinel is one of the dashboard that every CISOs and SOC managers must be aware of. So second thing is Defender for Cloud, which is another dashboard from the CISOs and SOC managers they need. So when you have workload that is hosting on Azure Cloud, when you have workload that is connected hybrid to your on-prem environment, we talk about your workload on cloud. What is the compliance level? What is the regulations level? Yeah. What is your inventory within your Azure cloud? Okay, so the dashboard itself for Defender for Cloud talks about these areas, including your security posture. So security posture is about secure score when you reference to your workload on Azure. Okay, so it's a different dashboard that has different intent and purpose for the viewer itself. Yeah, so it's particularly important from a CISO and a SOC manager to understand how compliance are my workload on Azure cloud. And if you look on the right side itself, Defender for server, Defender for storage, these are the areas that we talk about when it relates to Defender for cloud, because these are the things that usually will host on Azure cloud. Your servers, your storage, your containers, your keyboard, your DNS, your database. So these are areas that not much of difference when you compare to the on-prem, but you still will look on cloud. So the last piece I'm talking about is M365 Defender. Understand that M365 Defender look at external threats, things that is out of Azure cloud, things that is, I would say, out of your on-prem environment. So M365, we consolidate all the information, like let's say if you want to find out things about your end devices, you want to find out about your on-prem Active Directories, and also about the integrations with your cloud SaaS, your O365. Yeah. So think about M365 Defender as something that's external from your cloud environment, as well as the on-prem environment. So the long story short is these 3 key dashboards is actually a very important view, especially for the folks on the ground, like CISOs and the SOC manager, if they want to have a holistic view. Okay, this is my favorite slide when we talk about reference architecture. How does Microsoft understand from the security operations? From analysts and hunters, which I talk about in all my slides, right? It's always about these 2 areas which most of the security teams understand on the ground. The MTTA and the MTTR is about the responsiveness and the effectiveness in responding, and how we align to that mission. When we talk about traditional SIEM, this is a classic examples of all the logs, all the events that is sent can be from your infrastructure, it can be your modern SaaS. All these data are, in fact, the raw data logs that is sent to a central repository. This is kind of like a traditional approach where you have a classic SIEM that you use to monitor all the logs. But when it comes to modern SecOps, right, look at the second level itself, right, I will use that term, I would like the term more effectively, which is deep insight. Because a lot of times, a lot of analysts based on the ground is a lot of vertic, which when they have that raw data, right, they have too many logs to in fact to call, to even prioritize when you want to search for threats. So if you look at the deep insight flow itself, right, we talk about Defender for Cloud, Defender for 365 Defender, which is I talk about the two dashboard on my previous slide, how in fact it relates to the analyst perspective and how it relates to the SIEM itself. Of course, with that, right, we have the SOAR itself, which is orchestrated to help to reduce the analyst effort and time per incident, increasing the overall SOC capacity. Okay, that's the intent from a modern SOC, as well as from Microsoft angle. Of course, we have lastly, which is our Microsoft Sentinel, our SaaS solution, which is about integrations to a case management on the left. It can be your ITSM to create a ticket. Of course, then you look at the relationship between the Sentinel and the Microsoft Defender, how it actually correlates in view of the threat intelligence. Some environment, I have customers asking, can I have two SIEMs on the ground? Yes, it's possible, because some environments, organizations, they might not be comfortable yet to move to a full SaaS SIEM environment. So I would like to call that environment kind of like a hybrid. Meaning to say you still have your classic SIEM on the ground where you manage all your critical systems, while you also have another SIEM, which is the SaaS Sentinel, to manage all your external threats, as well as a cloud workload that is hosting on Azure cloud. Lastly, to wrap things up on this slide itself, we talk about the expert assistance. Okay, sometimes the threat hunters on the ground, they might need a second opinion, or they might need threat advice from the Microsoft threat experts. Yes, we do have this professional service, in fact, to give a helping hand to people on the ground. Yeah, so this is like a second opinion. It's like, because the Microsoft threat experts are the folks that came up with all the KQL scripts that is within the GitHub repo. They are able to even advise, and in fact, they welcome a lot of questions and queries on the ground, because to understand how the threats have been evolving. And lastly, of course, it can be a case of outsourcing the managed 24/7 MSSP environment to all our partners on the ground. My next ask to all the listeners is, right, we also have this lab environment called the Simul Land, which talks about, it's actually open source initiative by Microsoft and built by some of our security researchers, right? In fact, this environment is about having that real-world attack scenarios, right, to actively test and verify some of the effectiveness of our solutions itself. So I highly encourage folks on the ground, security ops, right, to even set up this lab environment to see the various attack factors, and also you can actually reproduce some of the well-known techniques, right, on the ground, going through that. Okay, this is the lab environment. Of course, Sentinel itself, you still need to know the tool, how to use it. And we have actually two, one is the Sentinel training lab, while the other is the Sentinel Ninja training. So the training lab is off the shelf. It's also available publicly for users to actually try out. It provides a really hands-on and practical experience, right, to understand the Sentinel product features, capabilities, and scenarios. Yeah. The Sentinel Ninja, okay, it not just talk about the SecOps perspective, which is the part 3 and part 4. If you look at Sentinel Ninja training, there's also about the architecture portion, about the deployment portion of the design, the workspace itself. It's about the log collections, it's about the watch list. Yeah, so it's a mix of more of a pre-deployment to the post-deployment perspective. But overall in all, it's like having that holistic understanding of how you can best deploy Sentinel in your environment. So I would like to end off this session. This is my last slide to introduce some of the SecOps best practices from Microsoft. And I highly encourage each and every one of you to have spend some time to look through some of these videos, which is really interesting and resourceful from Microsoft, because a lot of times we ask ourselves whether we have that off-the-shelf information, all this, right? there's a lot of information and that is on the ground. I mean, during this time, but when we come to Microsoft, we understand how in fact Sentinel works on the ground for even the whole SecOps team. Thank you for the session. Over back to Francois.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks a lot, and thanks the audience for so many questions. I think it's now time for Q&A. Please continue to raise new questions. We'll, as much as possible, continue to answer them. Right. Going through the questions, there was a lot of questions on having a link, having a reference, architecture.
Sure.
I think those were very much addressed by Khan and things. But maybe going back to things, he says, hey, we need to have a combination of service for M365, Windows, I mean, way beyond Azure itself. So how do we address that?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, I think it is a case-by-case scenario, because first thing, we need to understand which stage the customer environment is at and how much they want to broaden their onboarding journey to Microsoft. So when it comes to O365, I think the first thing first is it depends. The answer is depends. So whoever's out there that actually have this query, right, do get in touch with any of our sales representatives or even myself. Then from there, we can actually have a more understanding of what's happening in the environment to the advice further.
And if we were to integrate our threat intelligence platform with Sentinel, will Sentinel aid to deduplicate the incident, or using a backend algorithm to rewrite the confidence?
Okay, that's a good question, because I got this from one of my customers before. So bear in mind that threat intelligence feeds, especially from open source, right, they can be quite raw in their data. So whether we does that equalization in terms of having duplications, right, the answer is it really depends, because when we talk about threat intelligence feed, we want to prove from the outside world, right, you can have 20, 30 kinds of feeds that you can use. So the key thing is to really prioritize what kind of feeds that you're talking about, and from there to avoid that kind of duplication.
And is there any best practice on the incident management policies?
Sure. Gan, you want to take that question?
So that is really hard question. Thanks, Francois. I see a lot of questions asking about best practice, right? That is common question that we got every day.
Okay.
So it's really hard. I think you guys know that security is a journey, right? The best practice for your security team in terms of incident management is try to leverage automations as much as you can.
Yes.
I saw one question about, it seems we have a lot of logs. It seems security analysts need to, open one ticket and investigate manually one by one. So that is not a best practice.
Yes.
So one main suggestion that I always talk to my security operation customers, automate automations, right? Automation, and automations. And Sentinel, we have a lot of automation tool set for you to help to investigate and respond.
Yes.
So you can do at scale. You can free up your security operation resource to do something else that more innovative, right? For manual stuff, for security tasks that you do every day, clearing tickets, you offload that work to automations in Sentinel. That is the best practice in the
And on top of that, I just want to add on, remember the last few slides I shared about the best practices. Do spend some time about these resources, because I think from Microsoft angle, the threat intelligence team, they put in a lot of effort to understanding what's on the ground, what are the best things that can be done as well. So on top of what Gan has mentioned, do spend some time to find out about those resources. Yeah, Francois.
Next question was on obfuscation and what can we do with machine learning? I mean, the question is phishing attacks and malware recently use very advanced obfuscation techniques that can only be detected through manual analysis technique. Since it's hard to detect the attacks and at early stages, what we typically use EDR as a means to try to catch suspicious and malicious behavior before an attack. That's already breached an endpoint, can deal with critical damage. Will Microsoft detection use case starts to adopt more machine learning models to detect attacks based on advanced abnormal user behavior detection models, as compared to the current IOC TTP-based detection and hunting techniques?
I can take that question. So if you understand Sentinel, because of the interest of time, in fact, when you look at the analytics rules, which I talk about that the analysts can use, right, there's a lot of these types of rules that you can detect. One is about scheduling, one is about fusion, one is about the AI, which is I didn't talk about, and also about behavior analysis. Okay, so in the evolving threat landscape, right, we always hear these terms about the cat and mouse race. Okay, it's always about chasing the next threats that is available in the environment. But from Sentinel angle itself, we are a modern SIEM that understands all these evolving threats, as well as the behavioral analysis, as well as the AI portion. So one of the slides I mentioned, in fact, I talked about how do we investigate the incident best, right? It's actually touched on some of the behavioral tools that we can actually sniff out from the content itself, as well as the illustration map that talks about how that possible threats links back to the original source of attack. So the long story short is, right, you do understand the SIEM capabilities as well as the effectiveness of it. So to actually help to leverage in terms of efficiency and effectiveness.
Thanks for the minute. It was a long question, long answer.
Sure.
Maybe a shorter question. I'm not sure shorter answer, but I have data in log analytics workspace. Okay. Can Sentinel tap on the existing log analytics, or does it have to have its own copy of?
Okay. This goes back to the design itself, which is on a case-by-case basis. So bear in mind that Sentinel can only be onboarded to, can only be attached to one log analytics workspace. Okay. So there's a lot of design considerations before we even talk about the use of the solutions itself. That means to say, some environment they might have data resiliency. So because when you create that log analytics workspace, which is the data repository for the logs files, right? You need to understand that it can be from one subscriber, but sometimes this environment can be from an environment that they need to have that log analytics workspace reside in that environment. So it's a case-by-case basis. The long story short is, and it really depends.
I think it can.
It can,
but there is some caveat.
Yes, correct.
What does Azure activity logs collected in log analytics? I mean, what do we include in those log analytics? Maybe we can go in more detail.
Sure.
In log analytics, what are the activities logged?
Okay, I think you talk about a type of a log that available in Azure environment called Azure activity logs.
Yep.
So basically, maybe you go back one more step. Azure activity logs is the API logs. Okay, in cloud, right, in Azure, when you communicate with Azure services or resources in Azure, or even outside, right, between Azure resources and outside resources. So basically, you do through APIs. Okay, for example, you spin an EC2 instance, you create a new user, right? You create a new subscriptions in Azure. You create a new key in Azure Key Vault. Every single event has one API call, and that activity is collecting and logging inside Azure activity logs, right? Why this log is really important, right? Because it's API call. You see everything going on, activity inside Azure. So it's one type of log that security people recommend you to ingest into your CM solution, which is Sentinel. Okay, so once you ingest that log into CM solutions, you have a lot of built-in rules, detection rules, to be able to help you to detect suspicious, malicious activity around your API call. For example, if someone tries to spin an EC2 instance unusually or suspiciously, okay, Sentinel detection capability can help you to catch that suspicious activity based on the Azure activity logs. That is one example of the data that you can ingest to Sentinel. And of course, you can ingest, 100, 200 data to Sentinel as well. It doesn't need to be the log from Azure itself. You can ingest the log from your AWS environment, GCP environment, for example, log that you put in AWS S3 bucket, log from GCP environment, or even from your on-prem environment, hybrid environment, Sentinel really support as well.
So to add on, right, in fact, we have an official link that shows the kind of logs that's collected for Azure activity, specifically to the questions you're asking. So you just search for Azure activity list. I think you should be able to navigate from there. That shows all the list of activities that can be present in Sentinel itself.
And thanks for sharing on that multi-cloud scenarios. I mean, I know we do have customers who, from Sentinel, are able to monitor their activities on all their clouds in a centralized dashboard.
That's right. Yeah.
A question on manpower. I mean, the workflow you described earlier seems to show that for each alert, the security analyst needs to make a decision on a PR incident based on the response. This seems to hint that our monitoring log source increases. We may need to, as our monitoring log source increases, we may need to scale our manpower to the number of incidents triggered. Aside from the rule tuning, does Sentinel have the capability to recognize repeating incidents or incidents with similar patterns and create automation actions to automatically close incidents based on such patterns?
Yes, the answer is yes. So there is this more advanced features which I didn't showcase in my slides, which talk about repeated incidents. In the case of what Francois mentioned, like let's say if there's this IP address, bad IP address that has been highlighted, yes, you can actually automate that structure to have that mapping. That means it's like there's certain checks back end to see whether it warrants to be an incident. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Going back to a question we asked earlier, I mean, there was more precision on maybe the re-rating on incident, right? And then say that typically when Sentinel use, I don't know, taxi, I don't know, to call IOC from TIP, there is an assigned score to the IOC.
I see.
Would Microsoft do a re-rate using their own algorithm on the confidence rating?
Okay, that's a very good question, because when it comes to threat intelligence feeds, right, we recognize that some of the feeds from the source itself, I mean the company that provides these feeds, right, they have their own severity ratings as well as some of the details that's attached. As far as I understand, I haven't tried modifying some of the threat intelligence feeds from this source itself. Yeah, but we can explore that, and we can come back to you on this, because I need to check on that to see whether we can in fact modify the details within the threat intelligence feeds. I don't have answers for that right now.
Thanks all for all your questions.
Yep.
Hope we managed to address all your questions either directly in the Q&A section, or may I invite you to provide us your feedback on these sessions, what you loved, what we can improve. Your feedback is super important for us to keep improving on those Azure Fest sessions. Let us know also the topics you might like us to address. That's really important for us. All right. Thank you, everyone. We have new sessions on a weekly basis. So next section will be on security as code, right? So how to automate some of your deployment as well.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.